How often does a potential hire turn down an offer last minute because the big box business across the street is offering a better pay, and as a smaller company, you just can't compete? Today, I am joined with Brenda Gilchrist. She is the owner and a top consultant of the HR Matrix, and we're going to talk a little bit about how and where to source spare funds, how to promote strong employee retention amongst existing frontline staff, and how to prove the impact of competitive wages to leadership. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how solo HR managers can get buy-in to increase wages. So to give a little background on workforce.com, we are a full service HCM software company that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. So think scheduling, payroll, time and attendance, HRIS, and so much more. A big percentage of the clients that we work with are around 50 employees or less. So we completely understand the struggles to get managers, C-suite, or stakeholders to actually listen to the goals that HR wants to hit. Workforce has helped thousands of these smaller businesses showcase the hard-hitting numbers and the quantitative data to upper management, allowing HR to have more of a voice when it comes to their own budget and where that budget goes to. Today, I am joined with Brenda Gilchrist. Brenda, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Meredith.
Yeah, of course. Brenda is an HR consultant and owner of the HR Matrix. With over 25 years of HR management experience, Brenda has held executive level HR positions in small, mid-sized, large, and multi-state corporations. Her approach to HR combines a keen insight into company culture, strategy, operations, and best practices to help clients better understand their own needs. Amongst many things, Brenda specializes in compensation studies and design, recruitment, and aligning company-wide strategic plans with operational needs. So Brenda is the perfect person to have on this exact topic. Getting things kicked off, Brenda, I would love for you to tell me about some of the work you do with HR Matrix and your role as owner and consultant.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm the owner of a consulting firm. We specialize in human resources. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is looking at optimizing HR practices or human resources practices. Things like HR audits. We look at overall processes and policies and workflow. And we look at how is that all designed and is it aligned with business operations? I also go into organizations sometimes as a interim VP of HR, and I get to look at their systems and overall processes in that way as well. And then our firm just does overall, outsourced consulting that either don't have the heavy lifting or the extra pair of hands that we can provide as experts, or we just supplement their existing team.
Nice. And then how often are you working with companies where there's maybe only just one person on the HR team?
That's a great question. I would looked back at our client list, and about 50% of our clients have those solo HR practitioners. And, I really resonate with those solo practitioners because I was one at one point and early in my career. That's how I started. I think most of us start that way.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually been hearing a lot, from our clients within those smaller businesses on how impactful it is to kind of start within those smaller companies, how much you learn, how much you take away from it. But the reality is a lot of people are actually kind of leaning away from those bigger corporation roles and wanting to do smaller businesses. They kind of are able to get their hands in a lot of different fields, really implement things from the ground up. So I think it's a great place to start. And honestly, even then, maybe even move back to. So how important is it in today's world that companies are actually offering very competitive wages to attract and retain talent in today's labor market?
So, as a compensation expert, I've been doing compensation design my whole career. And I think the way I view compensation is it's a lot like the Maslow hierarchy of needs. There's the baseline salary or pay, and then anything on top of that is just icing on the cake. But we need to at least have a baseline that is competitive, because otherwise you can either lose your talent to the market or you can't compete with the market. So it's really important, I think, that it's just looked at as a baseline necessity to be competitive.
Absolutely. And When it comes to getting buy-in from leadership, where do you think HR kind of slips up the most?
I think that what I've seen over my years in HR is, HR practitioners, they understand human resources, but they don't often understand business operations. And I think the key missing ingredient is that an HR practitioner needs to be able to understand the financials. They need to understand business operations to an extent that they can discuss compensation from the standpoint of how does that align with the production outcomes, the
Mhm.
goals of the organization, the mission and the vision of the organization. How is that going to turn into ROI? So if I'm going to increase pay or bring in someone with a higher level of pay, how is that going to help the organization move forward with meeting its goals? So I think
Mhm.
that HR practitioners, they need to talk in the level of talk about operations, understand operations, and align their discussions and their pay practices around those outcomes.
I think that's a great point. Connecting it back to company-wide OKRs, making sure, hey, there is a reason for this dollar expenditure here. This person is bringing A, B, or C to the table. That's a great point to make. This first part of the webinar, I want to talk about how and where to source spare funds. And that seems almost like a, foreign concept, spare funds, where can those even be within a company? It seems like everybody's, over budget, if anything. So my first question, from your experience working with these smaller companies, what are some common sources of these spare funds that HR managers can leverage to support initiatives like wage increases in this case?
Right. So, as we all know, in a small business, there aren't a lot of spare funds. So, that's going to
Mhm.
be just the reality of doing business in a small organization. So, we have limited resources often as solo HR practitioners in a small business. But
Mhm.
what I always like to tell people in HR is make sure that the finance accountant or CFO, they should be your best friend in the organization. You should really understand what's happening financially. And then when you're modeling out any of your human resources policies, including any type of compensation wages with hourly rates or salary or bonuses, is you're looking with the CFO at modeling your compensation strategies. So one is just understand, is there, if we budget a certain amount, is there any additional cushion or room
Mhm.
from a financial standpoint to realistically increase wages? Now, looking at that, one of the things that I've seen where I can borrow from, so sometimes I just borrow from different areas where I might reduce something to gain in another area. And one of those areas has been a 401k match, for example. Over the years, what we've learned is some of these smaller companies, employees would rather have the immediate wage increase if it's deemed necessary. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But sometimes the match isn't as valuable as immediate pay in their pocket. So we might want
Mhm.
to borrow from that and change the way we look at our retirement planning, our retirement structure. And I can borrow from those dollars if we maybe eliminate or reduce the 401k match. Another area that I like to borrow from or reduce is in benefits. So sometimes we might look at an employer's offering 100% pay for employee only plus their family. And what we look at is maybe we might want to look at reducing costs on the family side and then allow them to pay more into that if they add more dependents. And then that way I can increase wages on the front end with pay versus padding it into all of the premium costs on the benefit side. So those are just a couple of examples of where I can borrow from or maybe reduce some expenses to increase wages. But really, this is a dance between myself and the CFO, as well as the COO and the CEO, to see what makes the most sense for our industry and what are we trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. You point me perfectly to this very first slide, if I can bring it up, and if Google Meet will let me. Awesome. So this first slide talking about 6 ways to afford increased compensation. And Brenda, you kind of mentioned some of these, looking at, offering other benefits, maybe kind of instead of pay, looking into benefits like PTO or flexibility, looking into 401k match. I love that idea. I think that is so underutilized, quite frankly. Saving on labor dollars, again, finding ways that we can pull in, all right, maybe it's not spare funds, but maybe it's misplaced funds. Where can we actually pull from? Labor dollars is an excellent way. Something with efficient scheduling, again, it kind of feeds into the flexibility of it all, but efficient scheduling really, really saves on those scheduling matter or on those labor dollar matters. So Brenda, you highlighted some great ones here. Another one I wanted to point out, that this is maybe a little bit, specific, especially for smaller businesses, but ESOPSs, I think that these are really cool. They're employee stock ownership plans. Again, a really great solution here. So there's some good ones here. Following up on this, how can HR communicate or present where these funds can be reallocated towards without feeling like they're crossing a line with their C-suite?
Right. I think that, by making the C-suite your partner, they're your strategic partner in planning, it's making them part of that decision versus just presenting that proposal without them having buy-in along the way. So I think that it's buy-in, it's participation from the C-suite, getting them involved in a very important discussion around compensation and programs and benefits. And I think that if you do that, by the time you do your proposal, they're already in step with you. So I think it's important to go ahead and have that planning process with them and say, what do you think about this? Let's model this out. Does this really work for us? And use some thinking of critical skills thinking. Evidence-based theory is one of the things that I used to teach. Is think about, if I do X, will Y happen? And the hypothesis is, we're going to say, if we increase wages in certain areas for certain positions, will that retain or attract them? I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to make that argument. And can we philosophically and even just by the numbers, the ROI, and studying the data, can we really make that argument? And if not, then maybe we don't need to increase wages. So it's really an analysis.
I think that's a great point. Are there any KPIs that you would recommend focusing on, especially when talking to your C-suite?
So I think the first thing is, when we're talking to our executives, is making sure that they've really looked at the type of positions that we have in the organization. So when we talk about compensation, I thought a lot about this before we talked today, Meredith, is if we really need to make sure we have the right people in the right positions, those positions are defined correctly in order to make pay decisions about how much pay does that position warrant in order to pay them fairly for the type of skills and outcomes and goals and everything that they're going to be doing for our organization. So it starts with a job analysis of what do we really need for the organization, and then aligning that with, again, business operations and outcomes. And then we develop a job description. And from that job description, then we look at the KPI, basically to look at how much to pay a position is we look at the market. We say, okay, we've done our job analysis. We looked at the operations. This is what we need. And we've developed a robust job description. What's out there in the marketplace? What do they pay? And sometimes we do our own salary surveys. We call around to our competitors. We pull data from various salary surveys. And that's important. Even as a solo practitioner, you can still look at market-based pay and make a decision about, is there any variance from where I'm paying the person or that position? It's not about the person. It's more about, what are you paying for that position versus the market? And is there any variance? Is it high or is it low? Are we below the market? And if so, that's the argument you need to bring to the C-suite, is we're below market and we have a risk in this position that we might lose that person to the market, or we can't recruit for that position.
That's such a great point, especially within hourly wage industries, food and beverage, healthcare, that sort of thing. Focusing on the position is obviously very key here, right? We're not hiring someone necessarily who is going to work the floor of a retail store, who is, excellent, has all the qualifications, but at the end of the day, it's the position that we're trying to fill, not so much the talent of the person. So, what are some typical resistance points or objections that HR managers might face in advocating for increased wages? And how do you recommend that they can overcome them when they are presenting their findings to C-suite?
Right. So, one story I always like to tell is when I was working in hospitals, we couldn't find enough of the LVNs at the time, and they had to have at least 2 years of experience. And I had to make an argument that, look, if I were to bring in the inexperienced LVNs, in this case, at a pretty competitive rate of pay while they're going through training for 2 years. So we paid them a training rate of pay working under seasoned LVNs. I made the argument that those LVNs will be a talent pool pipeline for us for the future, so we could pull from them. And I had to really convince the executives that that investment in talent was going to be a ROI for us in the future. And the future was 2 years. So they had to rely on my hypothesis, right? That I was
Wow.
going to get a return on that. And we did. So it's those types of arguments you have to say, look, what is it going to take for us to attract the talent, recruit the talent, retain this talent, and get creative. You need to look at, well, what are the marketplace what's the competition out there? What do we need to do to compete? Can we pay a little bit more for certain positions than maybe our competition, because we'll be able to attract them? So just arguing those operational kinds of issues with the C-suite, I think it's going to resonate for them to say, hey, if we pay a little bit more, for example, if it's in hospitality and we need to attract a certain level, we might, for certain positions, pay a little bit more above market strategically, because we know we're going to gain that talent from the market and pull from our competitors. So that might be a strategy. So it's compensation, wage increases. It's really a strategic approach, but making sure that we're at least, again, going back to the beginning, paying that baseline, because if you don't start with at least a competitive baseline, you're not going to be playing within the game of attracting the right talent.
Mm. Absolutely. I think you bring up a really great point in kind of showing that evidence beforehand, making sure that C-suite's saying, hey, okay, we are on board, whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, whatever, hoping that they will trust you to carry out whatever initiatives or goals, milestones will be met between that period of time. But yeah, making sure that, hey, we have our ducks in order to begin with, right? So making sure that employee retention amongst the existing staff is obviously very strong. Before we go into that, I want to point into this next slide, talking about what leadership looks for before offering these pay raises. So some of these roadblocks, some of these opportunities in some aspects. So market value of the jobs, we kind of covered that a little bit already. Again, filling the position, performance of the staff, of existing staff, the employee's value to the company, increased responsibilities. So this kind of is more in the vein of promotions, right, for those existing staff, and growth and development opportunities. So Brenda, my question for you is here, how important is it to leadership that their existing staff is engaged prior to offering increased compensation?
Right. I mean, I think it's really hard to process a increase to an employee that may not be performing at an acceptable level. So I think that one thing is you do tie your performance evaluations to whether or not someone does receive an increase. So I think that we need to look at how much is the employee providing a skill and at the level that we need in that position to support the organization. And if you don't show that there's really an impact, a positive impact by that employee or that position, then you need to make some other decisions operationally outside of just
Mhm.
wage increases. But sometimes what we've done is we just put a wage increase on hold. We give the employee an opportunity to come up to speed and to try to get them engaged. So sometimes engagement's a whole other topic or webinar probably is, if they're not engaged, there's probably reasons for that. It might be their supervisor. There might be some problems with the supervisor. There might be a problem with a fit. They may not be happy in that position. So looking at, is there something that we can do to further engage the employee as an organization? Is there something we can do to provide them some growth and development opportunities where they might be more engaged,
Mhm.
or not? So with increases, we definitely want to reward people that are engaged and are performing at an acceptable level. And if not, then you tie that back into your corrective action and performance evaluation program.
Absolutely. How often does low compensation actually feed into turnover amongst staff, would you say?
The theory has been that most people don't leave because of pay. I think that low compensation, my theory is that you're not going to attract talent if you have low compensation, because again, that's kind of that hierarchy of needs that you need to at least pay a minimum requirement to attract them in the first place. Most people leave because they're not feeling recognized in the position. There's a misfit in the skills or responsibilities or the level that they want to work at, or they don't feel the commitment to the organization's mission or vision or values, or they just don't have a really great supervisor. They're not inspired by their supervisor.
Mhm.
But wages are very important. If you don't have that at least baseline and you're not competing, you probably will lose them. So it's very important on the front end to make sure you have that appropriate level of pay and that you study the market and you do compete.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. And of course, going to their supervisors, people leave their boss, not necessarily the job, right? So that is very true across the board, whether or
Yes.
not an hourly staff or not, or hourly wage
Right.
industries or not. Could you share some examples on any successful retention programs or initiatives that have helped implement for small businesses with these limited resources?
Yeah, one fun thing that I like to take a look at is with small companies, there's often really limited ability to promote from within, right? Because
Yeah.
let's say there's only 10 people in the whole organization, or 25 or 50 even. What I like to do is look at, is there opportunities for creating some levels within the organization that it does give some people a sense that they are growing and developing and achieving a higher level. And so let's say someone starts as a technician one, and then eventually there's certain skill sets that they gain, then maybe they move into a level two, which warrants a next level rate of pay. So
Mm.
they're not bumping up against the ceiling really quickly, but they're able to still create some levels within the organization that makes sense. So sometimes we see crazy, numbers of levels that make no sense and they're not defined about how someone gets to that next level. But it should be um, when you create these levels, it should be there's a need for it. Number
Yeah.
one, that look, we do need a lead, or we do need a technician two or three. And you clearly define what those are and you align some pay with that. But that's one thing, is just looking at some pay leveling. And the other thing is, I think that giving people an opportunity to do things outside of their job, to say, look, I know you're at this technician one. I know eventually you want to be a CEO. Come with me. I'm going to invite you to a CEO forum. Just giving people a chance or an opportunity to, grow and know where do they want to go in their profession. So give them some experiences outside of their current job. I think that's another creative way of retaining and recognizing people.
I love that. We actually recently came out with this new feature called the Skills Matrix, and it's really cool in the sense where it actually helps kind of fill those necessary skills required within the workforce. So, using something like that, I could totally see a manager using that skills matrix to say, "Hey, we need somebody who has this specific skill. Let's upskill Jim to do this role." have that be promotion material for him, have that kind of increase that engagement for Jim in this case. And yeah, and using things like that, using tools in your tool belt, using technology, whatever it might be. So I think that's such a great point. Engagement, of course, here is absolutely key. Increasing loyalty to the company is really what's going to help that turnover maintain as low as possible at the end of the day.
Right.
How important would you say employee feedback and engagement is in improving retention, and what methods do you recommend for soliciting and actually acting upon employee feedback efficiently? I know a lot of HR managers struggle with the employee feedback aspect.
Absolutely. One thing that we've done as an organization or as a firm is we've help organizations create engagement surveys.
Mm,
So we do a survey, but with small companies, it gets a little bit trickier because if there's only 10 employees, I would say you may not need to do an online, full, robust engagement survey. But one thing that I really encourage organizations to look at is their performance evaluation systems. Sometimes they become online. You're not talking to the employee. Those opportunities to check in with your employee throughout the year and set goals and have discussions, that's your feedback opportunities to say, Meredith, how are you doing in your position? How is this working for you? Is there anything that we could be doing differently? Here's some of the expectations I have. Does that work for you? Do you feel like you can meet those goals? Is there any obstacles or anything that I need to know about that can get in your way? Just having those really rich conversations one-on-one directly with staff, I think that's going to create the engagement. It's going to give you a sense of what do they want to do as well. How do they want to approach tasks? So it's a two-way conversation. And I think that goes a long way throughout the years, just having those ongoing dialogue conversations. So training managers on having those rich conversations, not just once a year, but throughout the year, is important that they know how to do that, because it makes people feel that they have a say in how their work is done, how they approach their work, and how you do this together.
Truly, the beauty of working within a smaller company is having a lot of time to have those face-to-face interactions. A lot of mid-sized large businesses don't have the capacity to go up to each individual frontline employee and say, hey, is this the trajectory that we see yourself on? How are we feeling about A, B, or C, whatever it is? So yeah, the beauty of smaller businesses, I completely agree, is being able to say, hey, like, do you have a couple minutes? I would love to just sit down, talk for 10, 15 minutes, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page. Those face-to-face interactions are huge. And yeah, it really builds that idea of loyalty to the company, saying, I see you going up to this position. What do you think about that? Like, I see you as a manager. How do you feel? Whatever, that kind of thing. So I completely agree. In today's competitive job market, we kind of talked a little bit about this earlier. How can smaller companies differentiate themselves to attract and retain frontline talent, especially, when facing challenges like limited budgets for salary increase or even benefit packages, stuff like that?
Right. One of the principles of engagement is feeling good about your organization and what they do in the community. So that's one standard in engagement principles. So, it's
Absolutely.
an organization can get involved, or a small company can get involved with their community, and they can say, we support this nonprofit or our company. Even if it's 10 employees, we're all going to volunteer one day to help build houses, or
Yeah.
just helping to enrich the community. That really gives a great brand for the company. And any small company, they can create an employer brand. So people can say, oh, I've heard about that organization, just through some of their social media posts, through their volunteer efforts, having their employees maybe getting on boards or volunteering to be, on a position within the community. So I think that's one way of distinguishing yourself that doesn't cost hardly anything, to be able to have employees feel really great about the organization they're working for. And I
Mhm.
think that employees are really proud of organizations that do high quality work, that really truly care about the product that they develop or that they produce. And employees, when they see that they're working for an organization that has high quality, high values, the employees feel proud to be part of that. So I think that reinforcing your values, and even if, like I said, you're a small solo HR department, you can still help the organization, the C-suite team, develop the values. What are our values as an organization? And let's present those out to the employees so everyone knows what they are and that they're proud that they are supporting those values and that they're reinforcing those values throughout the organization and within the community. How they look to the outside is really important as well.
For sure. I love that. Connecting it back always to those company values, I think, is absolutely key. You can't go wrong there. For this next part, I want to talk about how to prove the impact of competitive wages to leadership. So thinking, maybe you get a little bit more budget to test the waters here, or maybe leadership is saying, hey, okay, let's see what you got and see what happens. So my first slide I do want to point to, or my third slide, I should say, talking a little bit about the impact of increased compensation, competitive compensation. So this is a couple quotes from Business Leadership Today. This first one on the top left, talking about recent research by Harvard University revealed that increasing pay among warehouse workers by just $1 per hour resulted in a 2.1 or 2.8 retention boost. Results also showed that every dollar per hour paid lost caused a 28% increase in turnover. This quote on the right talking about, according to a report by Lattice, compensation is a main driver of employee turnover, with 55% of employees quitting to take jobs with higher compensation. And this last quote on the very bottom here, when employees' needs are met, they're more likely to stay with an organization. Again, talking about that loyalty, being well compensated through pay, benefits, and other employee perks for the work they do motivates employees to do their work well. So my question for you, Brenda, is how does increased compensation feed into employee morale, productivity, and retention?
Right. And I think this actually starts to get into a little bit of the what I call pay at risk or bonuses, the variable
Mhm.
pay factors. We haven't really talked a lot about that yet, but one
Absolutely.
of the ways to impact the competitive compensation is looking at, is there any opportunity for positions to give them a piece of the pie, to say, we want you to feel this entrepreneurial spirit, or we want you to feel that your extra effort, your hard work, and your dedication to the organization, that there's some level of bonus or variable pay that goes into that. So I think that gives employees, if you define it correctly for them, they'll know that if I do X, or if I, work at a level of certain quality standards or meet certain quality standards, then I can get Y. And that, X and Y, the Y is the bonus at the end of the year, maybe, and it might be a gain
Mhm.
sharing program. It might be an additional match that goes into their 401k. It can be tied to just overall the business meeting its revenue goals for the year. And that's where that gain sharing is. If we meet the revenue goals, everybody wins and everyone gets a certain percentage. And then certain positions that, for example, sales positions are classic, but certain positions that do have an impact individually on how much revenue is produced, or even how much we save, can be some factors in whether or not we can share a portion of the organization's overall revenue goals. How much can we share that with the organization? But defining that and making employees excited about it and knowing exactly how they can impact the end of the year or the quarterly bonuses or the variable pay above and beyond just their basic pay. I think it's important to get them excited about it and get them to understand, well, how do I impact that and what does that look like, and get them involved.
I love the aspect of variable pay. I think that's a really great call. And honestly, even kind of tangent to this topic here, if we're talking about recruiting, right? I think saying, hey, this is our pay. We also offer this variable pay here, whether that's a bonus, benefit package, whatever it might be. But that really will make ears perk up because again, even if your pay is on the lower end of the market, or it's not as competitive as, the big box retail store across the street, anything like that, they say, hey, this is something that I'm going to have a lot more pull in. I'm going to be able to get promotions here. I'm going to be able to get this variable pay, whatever it is. So I think that's such a great point. What methods or metrics have you found most effective in quantifying the impact of competitive wages? I also really want to emphasize the quantifying aspect here, because I think HR really struggles with getting those hard numbers, those data-driven points kind of in their pocket to, again, showcase to leadership.
Right. I mean, I think this is where you get into compensation studies, salary surveys, and even if you are a solo HR practitioner, you can still look at data and you can show that to the, manager, the CFO, the executive, to say, here's where we're at. This isn't about me, the HR person. This is about you and your organization. Here's where you're at. And sometimes, the salary survey data, it's a little bit of a art and science. It might not be exact, but at least if you blend a few of these survey data points for a position, and you can argue that your position was accurately matched, and the job analysis, the job description's clear, it's defined, and you matched it appropriately, and you can argue it to the C-suite, this is what I found, and the data doesn't lie. So you have to show that variance, that if we don't do something, you're going to possibly lose this person to the market. So that's your call. And you put it on them, because it's not HR's fault. You don't have to be carrying the water for the executives for poor decisions, but give them the data, show them the analysis, make the argument, say, in my opinion, I think we need to do a wage increase of 5% with a variable pay of, let's say, 10% based on 5% individual goals and 5% on meeting our overall revenue targets. And boom, you got the formula to hopefully retaining that person or attracting that person. But you have to be able to make that argument with some good data. And again, the data typically doesn't lie. And I think that a CFO and an operations person, they're going to resonate with data. So I think leverage that as much as you can.
Absolutely. We have a client called Slap and Pickle. They're a burger restaurant, and I believe they're around 50 to 60 staff, somewhere around there. And their CEO, James, he actually, before Workforce, he was kind of scattered throughout a lot of different systems. He had the Excel spreadsheet, he was texting, emailing, data points just non-existent, right? And it wasn't until they actually started using Workforce, it was kind of an added benefit for them. They didn't even realize the amount of data that we were acquiring for them. His manager, one of his, frontline managers, actually came up to him with like all these data points saying, hey, we're seeing a lot of unauthorized overtime. We're seeing, a lot of, sales labor dollars not being spent very well. Let's fix that. And he came to James, this manager came up to James with all these data points, and they changed so much. They ended up saving a ton on labor dollars spent, their ROI increased, all that good stuff. But yeah, I think it's such a great point talking about C-suite. Oftentimes CEOs, CFOs, COOs speak language in numbers. Until they see those data points, it's often not known how much is being spent or how much, is being wasted, maybe in some aspects, like unauthorized overtime in this case. So I think that's such a great point.
Now, let me add to that too, and I'll piggyback. That story, to me, what that means is they looked at their overall staffing, did a staffing analysis. So when we go in and do HR optimization, we're looking at the staffing design. And sometimes we'll see, gosh, you have a lot of people that are managing, but not a lot of people that are actually doing the day-to-day job. So let's eliminate some of these manager positions that really aren't adding too much to the overall outcomes. Or we might find that they've really inflated positions. So we might, in one organization, we saw someone hire a CIO for a very small company. And we said, what our recommendation would be is eliminate the CIO and replace it with, it was 4 positions with actual hands-on technical positions in the IT department versus having a very high price CIO for the organization. So it's looking at that. I love that manager did that for, it was a burger company, you said?
Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's so great. And even, talking about getting those differentiating factors between, even locations, right? I think Slap and Pickle has 2 locations. So they were actually able to see with their live insights, all right, which location is doing better in terms of labor dollar expenditure and ROI. They were actually
Right.
able to look in their staff count and say, all right, maybe we don't need this many people at this location because the customer demand isn't as crazy as location A, let's say.
Right.
So really interesting. And yeah, and having that information and, being able to kind of outsource it to a software system instead of having a CIO maybe on board and having a whole job dedicated to it, complete savings right there for sure.
Right.
Awesome. What does the ROI of investing in competitive wages look like, would you say?
Well, I think that, if you invest in competitive wages, you're going to get you're going to get better talent typically, and then you're going to see the outcomes in you, like we talked about, quality outcomes. You'll see that there's better workflow processes in
Mm,
place, because if you have people that are paid a little bit more competitive, or you maybe even leading the market, they're probably going to bring to the table a little higher level of skills that are going to really set you apart as a organization or a company. But we have to be realistic. What can we really afford to do?
yes.
And then look at what is the outcomes of this position? How are they helping support the organization? And then reassessing that. So I would say look at your ROI and your wages at least biannually. We look at, have you looked at this for a while? Have you looked at the pay rates? Have you looked at the positions for a while? Are they still aligned with meeting those business outcomes? So it's an ongoing process. You can't just do a one and done comp survey or compensation survey and hire people and be done with it. But it's always looking at, is that still the right formula with pay and the type of people, the type of positions that you have?
For sure. I think that's a great point. I always like to close out our webinars with this last question for you, Brenda. What are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways that our audience can leave with to garner buy-in from leadership to increase wages?
Well, I think, just recapping, I think that the top 3 things is make sure you do a very good job at the job analysis and the job descriptions, looking at what are those types of positions that you need. 2 is evaluating the market. What do you need to pay competitively at a baseline? And then looking at working with your CFO and operations to see if there's any other opportunities for, the variable pay or the bonuses or some gain sharing programs. I think that those are going to be the top 3 options for HR people to look at operations and compensation and people and align it all together to create a really good program that's going to work to move the needle at the organization, meet goals, and engage employees and keep them satisfied and retained.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brenda, for coming on today. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. I'm sure our viewers did as well. We'll have to do a part 2 on, variable pay and what that looks like a little bit more for hourly wage businesses. But until next time, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out our channel for more content like this. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye, everybody.